Thank you very much. Thank you for this great opportunity. Look at this room. I don't think the Tea Party's dying.
No.
Yes, Mr. Rhodes' plans to destroy the Tea Party is not going to work anywhere soon. The Tea Party, Constitution, America. My name is Brannon. A story about who I am. I was actually raised by my mother had me. She was 19 years of age. The first election she could vote for, she voted for Goldwater, which was very interesting raising a Democratic household. But she understood the founding principles of what our party's supposed to be. Myself, I was the first person in my family to go to college. I became a doctor, and my brother became an attorney. So my mother with two boys, without a father, but by the hand of God, actually got to pursue their dreams. But what makes America special is not succeeding. It's every time you fall down and get back up. Your neighbor, your community, your church, your synagogue, your temple. What builds America is us. We're the only country ever based upon the individual over the collective. We're the only society ever based upon the rule of law, not the rule of men. But the last 100 years of progressivism has led now to the rule of men. They try to make decisions in our lives to exempt themselves. Washington challenged us. He said, we the people are the true keepers of the Constitution. I believe the Tea Party movement is an extension of Thomas Jefferson. He said, if a civilization expects to be ignorant and free, it expects it never was and never will be. We are not ignorant anymore. We are studying that page and a half of the Declaration. We are studying the 6th page of the Constitution. We're studying the page and a half of the Bill of Rights. We're reading the documents behind that. We're looking for men and women who are leaders by being servants. The Greek word comes to my mind, meek, and it's quietly powerful. We stand there. You watch with Senator Paul, Senator Lee, Senator Cruz. They're standing there articulating the message of individual freedom, constitutional rights. They're the ones being attacked at home by establishment in our party. I believe there's something occurring today. I'm very optimistic. We can look at the problems. We will look at the problems tonight. But I believe we're going to look at the vision of the future. With this rebirth of our Constitution in everybody's hearts right now, we could literally take the dream our founders started 135 years ago and look out there where men and women are not judged by their color of their skin, by their socioeconomic class. They're going to judge about their merit, freely associate. We understand that more local is more better. And if we do that in a loving, kind way, we can change hearts. So 2 questions I really believe I asked myself 5-6 years ago, I believe our founders have asked themselves. Who or what is sovereign, and what is legitimate role of government? They're both answered in the 2nd paragraph of our Declaration. Our Creator made us in His image, so we're sovereign. We have certain inalienable rights, which means they cannot be taken or given. First one is life. From the moment of conception to natural passing, and everywhere in between. There is no such thing as quality of life. All life is precious and quality. Without that, you can't have liberty, with its freedom and responsibilities, and the pursuit of happiness, which is your American dream. But the very next question is answered in the very next sentence. What is truly the legitimate role of a government? We, given our consent, not to be ruled over by men, but the rule of law. But the moment a government oversteps its bounds by infringing on the individual's inalienable rights, it now becomes illegitimate. And we're standing up, and then Jefferson articulated 28 things he called tyranny. And the Bill of Rights does not grant one single right. It's a list of God-given natural rights which the federal government can never infringe upon. What we need now are men and women who know the Constitution, can apply that with a backbone that never wavers, and back off and be unbiased umpires and let the American spirit bloom, and that American rebirth could occur. I thank you for this time. I cannot wait to answer every question you have. Thank you very much.
Stand the whole time if you don't want to. If you like to sit at the table when you're not speaking, if you stand when you speak, so people in the back can see you.
Well, my name is Mark Harris, and I'm certainly honored to be here tonight and to spend this time with you. And great to be back at Hershey's and great to be here in Gaston County. Just to tell you a little bit about what brings me to this place. I serve currently as senior pastor of the First Baptist Church of Charlotte, North Carolina. and made a decision to step into this race, really, as things continue to progress in my heart and mind. I was born and raised in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My mom was a kindergarten teacher. My dad worked at Container Corporation of America, making corrugated boxes. And there, growing up in Winston-Salem, went to Reynolds High School, and when it came time to go to college, chose to go to Appalachian State University, major in political science, thought I was going to spend my life in public policy. And one reason I thought I was going to spend my life in public policy was because at the age of 14, my mom and dad dropped me off 3 days a week at the American for Reagan's office over on Healy Drive in Winston-Salem, where I had the privilege of stuffing envelopes and making phone calls. And as a result of that, I had the privilege of going to the inauguration in January of 1981 to see Ronald Reagan sworn in as president. One of the things that has been interesting in my life is I think all of us are shaped by the era in which we grow up. And that was the era that shaped me in so many ways. For the last 26 years, I've had the privilege of being in ministry. And for 24 and a half of those years, serving as a senior pastor, walking through life with people. And what that really means is sharing in their successes, sharing in their challenges, and really just seeing what they faced in their lives. And I'll be honest with you, whether when I started 24 and a half years ago as a senior pastor, and even through today, where I've been senior pastor at First Baptist Charlotte, the concerns are still the same. They've just intensified a great deal. For instance, people are worried today. They're worried about a sluggish economy. They're worried about eroding values in this nation. They're worried about a federal government that continues to step into our lives each and every day. And perhaps the greatest concern that I hear that they have is they're concerned that we've got elected leaders that just no longer care. Well, one of the reasons I felt the need to get in this race is because I do care. I spent the last 26 years in ministry caring for people and walking through life with people. But you see, as a 14-year-old, stuffing those envelopes at American for Reagan's office, there was something embedded in my heart that I've never gotten over. You know, Reagan taught us that building a strong America and American politics is really and truly like building a three-legged stool. You have to have a strong domestic agenda, you have to have strong foreign policy, and you have to have strong traditional values. And Reagan taught us, and by the way, this is a message probably for the Republican Party as well as the nation, that if you try to weaken or you try to break off any one of those legs, that stool cannot stand. I'm certain tonight that we're going to be talking about a strong domestic agenda, talking about the Constitution, talking about shrinking this government, talking about tax reform. We're going to be talking about issues of a strong domestic agenda. I'm sure we're going to be talking tonight about a strong foreign policy where we understand that we have watched for the last 5 years a president and a United States Senate that have watched America's reputation on the world stage nearly be destroyed. Amen. Because he's tried to do something the craziest I've ever heard, lead from behind, when the truth is he's just failed to lead. And all of us in this room understand that. So we need to recognize a strong foreign policy, but then we need to recognize the importance of strong traditional values. You see, they're what make America work. Values like faith and family. They're critical in our day. So we're going to be talking about the issues tonight. I count it a privilege to be here with you, and thank you for the opportunity to just run and be a candidate to represent the people of North Carolina with a North Carolina voice standing for North Carolina values. God bless you.
Thank you. My name is Heather Brannon. I'm one of the Republican primary candidates here tonight. Thank y'all for all coming out. We truly appreciate the opportunity to be here, speak with you, and answer your questions this evening. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. I grew up in Wilkesboro, North Carolina, went to Winston-Salem State University where I got my bachelor's of nursing degree, and it was while I was getting that bachelor's degree I decided to join the military. For me, it was about being able to serve what I saw as an underserved population. And I spent almost 4 years in service before I came home due to an injury that precluded me from being able to deploy. And I don't look at my injury as being a bad thing. I look at it as one of God's many blessings in my life. One of my last jobs that I did for the military, my last 26 months in, was to work with our men and women who were coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan. And People don't realize just how bad these men and women are. They don't understand when they come home how bad it is for them to try to re-enter life with members who don't understand, especially our National Guard and Reservists. And I truly believe that I was injured so that I could go do that job. Well, while I was doing that job, I began to realize that our government cared less about our reality as an American citizen living everyday life as they did about perception. Because my job as a branch chief was to fight perception every day and show what reality was to generals and say, please, we need to do the right thing for these soldiers. And that is truly where I did my most service in the military. And when I got home, I thought, I'm going to go home. I'm going to be a civilian. I don't have to worry about the government. I'm going to do my job as a nurse practitioner. I'm going to take care of my patients. I was extremely wrong. I got into my job and I realized that the government is trying to tell me what I can prescribe, what tests to run on my patients, and I've got patients who are scared to death that they're not going to be able to pay for it. And then that doesn't even factor in the resources that used to be out there in our communities for our patients. And so I made the decision to run because I felt like I was being led to serve again, just like I had served in the military, to an underserved population. And I truly believe with Kay Hagan in our Senate seat and with President Obama in our White House, we, the American people, are the underserved population at this time. And it's time that we have citizen legislators who go up there and who read and understand our Constitution and who realize that it was written in everyday language for a reason, so that every man, even if you couldn't read it and it was read to you, you would understand it and there would be no need for interpretation, because that is one of our biggest problems. We have people who are interpreting our Constitution and interpreting our laws for us, and we don't really understand how they truly affect us. And that's why we have got to start now in 2014 with taking back our country and doing that with leaders who are citizen legislators. They don't want to go and spend 20, 30 years sitting in Washington and being insulated from everyday life. They want to go, take their everyday life experiences up there, do their job, and then come back to what they know and be the mentor for the next person to come. And work at being the solution to the problem long term, not just their initial time there. And I just want to say that we're going to talk about a lot of issues here. I know you guys have a lot of questions, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here and answer them for you. And I just wish y'all a blessed evening. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Bill Flynn, and I'm a candidate for the United States Senate here in North Carolina. And everybody, there's one non-negotiable, I think, and that is Kay Hagan has to leave the state of North Carolina. Amen. That's the thing. By way of introduction, let me just tell you quickly, I'm a broadcaster by trade. I've been doing it for 30 years. A lot of people are surprised that you have to be able to listen before you can talk if you want to have an audience. And so I've been listening to people across the state for decades. A little bit of personal information. I don't need to be doing this. I'm working. I've got a lovely wife who's got a job and takes great care of me. I've got 3 adult sons that have shown me what it is to be a proud parent. And I could go on and then, all emotional about that. At the same reason that I say I don't have to do this, I've just told you exactly why I must do this. Look around this room. This is about saving the United States of America from a demise that is happening before our eyes. Where are the adults in the room? We can't let this happen on our watch. How many of you saw Billy Graham at his special? And he talked about what was happening in his heart and where he went in the country. And he saw the decline. In his view, a spiritual decline, and I agree with him. We also have a political decline. We have a deficit of character in high office that is accruing enormous devastation to our country. And we have to understand this. Very simply, there are 3 modes for government. Government can be protective of your rights the proper way. Government can be ambivalent to your rights, which is not good. Or government can be hostile to your rights. How many of you sense we have a government that is hostile to your rights? Absolutely. Yeah. That must go away. It must be challenged, and we have to be able to articulate these things in a very clear and serious way. As a part of this discussion, everybody in this room, we have reasons to be very angry with our government. But I'll tell you this, and one thing I've learned in broadcast is that you have to be able to present a message that's not hate-filled. Doesn't mean you're compromised, but it means that you have a message that people are attracted to. As much as we can stand here and talk about the IRS and the NSA and Benghazi, these things are critical and they must be resolved. That's not going to bring people to the party. It's going to help educate, it's going to help motivate, but we also have to activate everybody that isn't already active. And we do that by talking about things like, how about American exceptionalism? Where is that message today from our leaders? It took a president from Russia to introduce that to a new discussion level, remember? And what is the source of that American exceptionalism? It's not the French Revolution that's based on 3 tenets that are nowhere near the American Revolution. We're based on that basic idea that we are endowed by our Creator, that our rights come from God. That's the issue. We need to be talking about that exceptionalism. We need to talk about how the economy is going to be booming with the newly available resources of gas and oil, and we're going to see a renaissance of economic opportunity in our country because jobs will be coming in from around the world as we become much more competitive here. In closing, I just want to tell you my view of government. What is this job as United States Senator? If you look at the North Carolina Constitution, it says something very powerful, and this group should understand it. And that is, the job of the citizen is to instruct their representative. Isn't that refreshing? It is your job to instruct the representative. And in my view, the job of the representative then is to take that instruction and prioritize it. But before moving forward on any of it, look at it through the lens of the United States Constitution. If everybody in this room wants something, but it is not the job of government, I have to be the guy that says, sorry folks, you're not going to get the keys to that car. I can't do it because my oath is to uphold and defend the United States Constitution as a member of the United States Senate. In closing, I think it's great to remember some of the words of people that walked before us. Thomas Paine said, it is the duty of the patriot to protect his country from its government. But I submit to you, those words echo today. It's truthful and must be applied today. My name is Bill Flynn. My website is billflynn.org. I invite you to visit, and thank you for the chance to speak.
Sir, is it a possibility that we get 2 microphones, or is that, you just got 1 mic? Okay, that's fine, thank you. We'll make it else, that's going to happen on, so I'm going to have to share. I'm just kidding. All right, so I'm going to start on the questions now. I'll ask the questions that are written on these cards, and then each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer. They may not take the 2 minutes, but we do ask that you stay on point so we can get through as many questions as possible. It is my understanding of the Constitution that the Senate may concur, but is not responsible for funding bills. Given that, if you are a constitutionalist, what can you do in the Senate to shut down the Affordable Care Act, Common Core, or the funding of agencies run amok, such as the EPA, DOT, and DOE, etc.?
Thank you. I wrote a paper about 3.5 years ago concerning the health care of America. And one of my conclusions was how we kill this beast. It is Article 1, Section 7, Clause 1. All appropriations are in the House, which you just talked about. That is the most important one because they put the purse closest to the people. The Senate, I think what they could do is articulate, like Ted Cruz did, articulate that. They don't have the power to do that, but to articulate that to the House members there. And then if it happened to pass, then at that time you could add amendments and not vote for it. Also, as a senator, we are ambassadors from the sovereign state to the federal union. We also have the power to turn back to our state legislators and say now to state legislators, Article 6, Clause 2 does not make us servants to the federal government. We have a responsibility. We're duty bound to say no to this. That's what the 9th and 10th Amendment are for. So I think it's to be that ambassador, that spokesman, to hold unwavering what that is. But the purse string is clearly in the House, and the Senate must support them.
Well, I think that's a great question, but I would also point to the premise of the question, and that is that the problem currently does not lie in the United States House. All you have to do is look at the last situation that took place on Obamacare. I've said to so many people that this last shutdown we went through, when the history books are written, that will be laid at the feet of Harry Reid and Barack Obama. In fact, I made the point that really and truly, Republicans were divided over how to handle the Obamacare issue, and only two men in America I know could have united the Republican Party, and that is Harry Reid and Barack Obama. If you remember, the House of Representatives passed the bill that said, let's defund, went over to the Senate, and Harry Reid said, we're not even going to consider it. The House came back and said, well, then let's delay. That was a different strategy. We'll delay 1 year. That went over to the Senate. Harry Reid said, we're not even going to allow the Senate to take it up. And then they said, well, okay, if we're going to have to live with it, let's at least get rid of all the exemptions. So here's a novel idea. Congressmen will have to live under the same laws that they pass for people. And they sent that over to the United States Senate. And once again, Harry Reid and Barack Obama said, we'll not even take that up and allow the Senate. We have watched government inaction over these days, and it is the inaction of Harry Reid and Barack Obama that has brought us to this place. What we desperately, desperately need are leaders that will stand strong and continue to be that bully pulpit and expose the truth to the American people. Thank you.
We know that the Affordable Care Act got through the Senate, being tacked on a bill that came through the House. Harry Reid did a wonderful job of erasing everything but the first sentence in that bill for it to be passed. Unfortunately now, what we have to do is take back that Senate so that the House can send back another bill to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, and then as a senator we can vote. Otherwise, what we're doing is playing politics. The House sends something through, just as Pastor Harris said, and Senator Harry Reid blocks it. And just like they did today with the filibuster, we're watching them destroy our American process. So we have got to vote in the right people who will vote the way we need to. But as far as being able to turn it around in a day or two, there's nothing that the Senate can do because the bill is already out there and it still has to start through the House and go into the Senate.
Related to this issue, I recently had a conversation with the United States Congressman, and I asked the question, where is the resistance in the House to push back when the President extends his authority? For instance, under Obamacare, to say he's going to change the mandate. Wait a minute, we have all law is made in the House. Where's this authority coming from? And why isn't there a pushback? The answer was very revealing, and I think it cuts to the core issue here. The Congressman said, well, if we were to do that and ultimately lead to articles of impeachment, we don't have the votes in the Senate. And he's right. But the problem with that is, since when do we do the right thing based on a calculation of probability of success? Exactly. That's the wrong attitude. If you talk to our founders, and we had a probability curve, chances of us getting this crown to go away would be pretty low. Don't even pick up your arms. The point is, we must have men and women that are willing to do the right thing at whatever cost. That's what we have to have in this country. There is a right way and there is a wrong way. And that's what we have to address in this debate. We've got to be clear on that. We've got to be ready to stand on this issue. I do want to commend what happened with Senator Cruz. He articulated something that then became an issue in the House. And I think it's essential that we have people that can take the messaging, not just to the people inside Washington, D.C. about these issues, like affordable health care, but make the case, as Ronald Reagan showed us, go around a roadblock if there is one and make the appeal to the United States of America and citizens across, in this case, North Carolina. Ted Cruz did that very successfully. I took a lot of notes on that, and I'd like to be a part of that effort in the future. Thank you.
Is there anything as a senator that you can do to annul presidential executive orders over domestic policies? We'll start this way.
The question has to do with executive orders of the president. We need to understand what an executive order is. An executive order is really only permissible when it has to do with supporting existing law. When somebody uses an executive order, I don't care who the president is, to legislate, if legislation is in fact the cause of that executive order, It's a violation of the oath of office. You cannot do that. We need people that are willing to stand and grab a microphone and challenge this consistently. Not be afraid of it. I don't care if there are the votes. The executive order is not a legislative tool, yet it has been used that way under this president excessively. You and I must understand that is not the function of an executive order, and to stand and challenge it and say to the president or whoever, no, this will not stand, and here's why. Thank you.
As Bill just pointed out, he's correct. An executive order is only an extension of legislation. As a senator, you can stand and say, no, this is not your job. You have overstepped your bounds. And in doing so, you can then turn to your house and look at them and say, we need to look at impeachment of this president. We will work on getting the votes we need for you in the Senate to impeach him, but let's at least start the process where the process needs to start, which is in the House, because we cannot vote in the Senate to impeach a president until the House has begun that process for us.
I would echo a lot of what we've heard here tonight. I think we recognize that we've got a president that has become drunk on power and is choosing to lead by fiat, who is choosing to lead by executive order, and is failing to recognize. We've seen that just in recent weeks. So the whole Obamacare, when he got up and just said, okay, suddenly I've decided if you like what you got, maybe you can keep it. And suddenly we hear from the insurance companies that go, wait a minute, that's not possible. We've been working for years. We've been working for months to get this schedule out. Again, if the American people would simply awaken in this nation and understand that that whole executive order, the whole idea of this president stepping up and declaring by fiat what we're going to do when you had a law that was passed by Congress, again, recognizing that he has no understanding of the constitutional law he supposedly taught at the university. My concern is that you and I recognize that we are living in such a day that demands the American people to awaken to what we are facing. And what it's going to take is simply the American people rising up and saying we will not do this anymore. And it's a great opportunity for you and I to educate the American people. If ever there was an example of why the government doesn't belong involved in the private sector, it's this issue right here. Government thinks they can just make decisions here, there, and yonder and take no consideration into the fact of what the private sector has been seeking to do and operate through the insurance and those kind of things that go with it. We don't need a government that continues to involve itself in the private sector.
All legislation in the legislative branch made out of the House and the Senate. Legislative branch has 33 functions. The executive branch has 13. The judicial branch has 6. The problem is we now are led by the executive department. Woodrow Wilson's dream is coming to fruition, where you have a monarchy. It's because I believe we abdicated our role by electing men and women in Congress, men and women in state legislatures that really believe in this progressive idea of the government. That's why this rebirth has occurred. What we need to do is understand the executive, we just started the definition of executive orders, and it's only within the executive branch. They cannot make law. The Obamacare is a phenomenal example how Congress did not write the bill, did not read the bill, but exempted themselves and their friends. The president's function constitutionally is to veto unconstitutional acts. He signed it, put his name on it. And the Supreme Court's function is to give their opinion but not enforce it. They looked at Article 1, Section 3 in the first clause, which limits the federal role of causing how to do taxes, excise dues, imposts, and called a free transaction a tax. So what happens when those checks and balances horizontally get askew? It's the vertical checks and balances that are superior. That's you and me. That's the state legislators. That's the 9th and 10th Amendments. We need men and women who understand the Constitution, articulate it, and never waver at all.
What is your policy regarding immigration reform, illegal immigration, and ICE. What do you see as a solution to our illegal immigration problem?
I know I don't have a unique perspective on this, but I was stationed in El Paso, Texas, which is a border town. So I got a taste firsthand of what it was like to have people coming across the border, and there were times I actually got emails in my military email that we were on the lookout for people who came across the border illegally and were dressed as our own soldiers. So for me, the first thing we have to do is secure the border. We have funding, we already have it in place to secure the border that we have now. Once we secure our border, the next thing we have to do is make it less desirable for you to be here illegally. Our illegal immigrants come here. They're illegal. This is criminal. It's just like if you stole a piece of candy from Walmart. You have done a criminal act. You did not legally enter our United States. So they don't deserve all these bonuses that they're getting. They're getting Medicaid, they're getting housing, they're getting our SNAP program. If you are a legal immigrant, if you do your paperwork and come over here legally, in most cases, it's 7 years before you can apply for those things. 7 years of proving that you are a hard-working, want-to-be-here person. We have to stop that. We take those people out of our eligibility, we cut some of the funding for that, and we save our government money. We also make it less desirable to come here and bring your friends here and tell them about it, and we open up jobs and monies for people that actually need it. And that's what I would do about illegal immigration.
Well, I think Heather's touched on a number of the aspects that we feel very strongly about, and I agree with the issue of first of all, recognizing the need to secure the border. That has to happen, and I find it hard to believe that a nation that sends armies and navies around the world to fight wars cannot protect our own borders. I don't think it's a matter of we can't, I think it's a matter of the will, and we won't. So I think we've got to make sure we have those strong borders. But I also believe that we've got to simply begin to enforce the laws that we already have in place. That would be a second aspect that I think is absolutely critical. And if there was a third area I would touch on, it would be that we need to have a stringent and thorough review of the issues of the worker program and the worker visas. There is a reality that we have to understand about this immigration issue. And that is, as you talk to farmers in the western part of the state, as I've had the privilege of doing, as you talk to those that are in the fishing industry in the eastern part of the state that I've had the privilege of doing, they have a serious labor issue that is of great concern right now. They have jobs and they have positions that they can't get people to take. And therefore, many of the folks that come in and are doing that work, frankly, don't want a pathway to citizenship. They don't want amnesty. They simply want to work, make some money, and take it back and take care of their families. I think we need a thorough review and a stringent review of that very issue in and of itself. I will make this clear. I am absolutely opposed to the comprehensive immigration reform that is currently being discussed in Washington, D.C. And if for no other reason, based on this, when you see the word comprehensive, be afraid. Be very afraid. Because if they push bills of comprehensive immigration reform, we'll get what we got with comprehensive health care. Something that is such an omnibus, such a bill that is going to be rammed through that we'll all regret it time and again. We must have legislation that is understandable, broken down, so that we can actually understand the bills we're voting on in the United States Senate.
Goes back again, the Constitution, first time, only time, and always. We're debating Obamacare is not in Article 1, Section 8. It's not there. And we're debating this. Unacceptable. Sovereign borders are. It's Article 4, Section 1. You protect our sovereign borders. Without a sovereign border, you don't have a sovereign country. We are built on legal immigration. From many one. We want everybody in our country. The best and brightest. We have no idea who's coming over is going to have the cure for cancer. Invent a better widget. That's American dream. That's American exceptionalism. But it must be under the rule of law. We must have sovereign borders. I read a paper, Madison Report in 1800, discussed this very clearly, and they talked about this. We have to build our country that way, but the idea about this, we're talking about this comprehensive act, let's read that fully. We're gonna have drones in our borders, 150 miles inland, flying over our country, protecting the borders. That covers 80% of Americans. Illegal aliens don't pay for Obamacare. See, this idea that we walk away from the Constitution and try to get the idea, what's the best policy? When we start hearing words about policy, we don't want social engineers. We want to keep our oath on that Constitution. The Constitution is 6 pages. An example, there are over 176,000 federal regulations. Obamacare is 11.5 million words. See, that's tyranny. We got to go back always, every time, on every issue. And if it's not there, well, the state will handle it. That is a republic.
I don't have a whole lot to add on this, although in talking about Obamacare again, I'm reminded, looking at the folks at this table, including me, I think it's an accurate statement that there are more people that are running for the Republican nomination for the United States Senate seat in North Carolina than have successfully enrolled in Obamacare in North Carolina. And I like that. But regarding immigration, I think it's important to know, sometimes what we see on the left is people trying to make this an issue of bigotry or an issue of, you don't like this group of people, you're anti-Hispanic. If you really look at the Hispanic audience, you find out that they are Americans. And the people that have come here the right way have an intention to keep the rule of law into effect in most every case. And the idea that we would ever dare trust this government with comprehensive anything is a frightful thought. Here we are, it's as if a newborn child says, I'm going to go and run a marathon race, 26 miles. We have an infantile government, really. Ultimately, it should stay that way with regard to the Constitution, limited government. It's telling us it's ready to run a 26-mile race. You and I are the ones that have to stand up and say, no, that's not for you. We're going to put you in diapers, all right? And we're going to say, fix the border. Once you do that, this is how I raised my children. You know, you can say, do 5 things, boom, 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 and you were lucky if you got one of them. What we learned to do was, listen, go do object number 1, come back to mom and dad. Once you've done it, we'll inspect it, and then you'll move on to number 2 and number 3. That's how we have to approach the federal government on every issue, I believe, especially when the term comprehensive is in front of it. Fix the border, then we'll talk, is my position. Thank you.
The next question is, what do you see as the single most important issue facing North Carolinians in the next 5 years, and why? North Carolinians.
Well, I'll be honest, from a U.S. Senate perspective, and that's the office we're running for, I would have to say the most concerning issue facing North Carolinians is the same issue that is facing all Americans, and that is this whole Obamacare issue that is staring us square in the face. We're not here to beat a dead horse tonight, but let's just be real about this. We were told by the Congressional Budget Office that by 2023, and that is just a decade away, and you all know how quickly a decade goes by, that left unsettled, that we are going to be spending $3 trillion a year on health care in this nation. Now, when people say, well, you know, Mark, we've heard people talk about millions and billions and trillions, and that doesn't even compute anymore. But let me help all of us help that compute. Currently, the federal government spending total is around 3.6 or $3.7 trillion. To think that in 10 years that we will be spending $3 trillion just on health care, ladies and gentlemen, that is unsustainable. Listen, I am constitutionally opposed to Obamacare. I am philosophically opposed to Obamacare. But we as the American people must wake up and realize this is taking us down a road to economic disaster that is not sustainable. And that will be the biggest issue of our generation when we look at the big picture. And I just think we've got to keep ringing the bell, as Senator Cruz and others have continued to ring that bell, as much criticism as they took. The reality is they understand the seriousness of the moment we now face. And that, to me, would be the biggest issue in the days ahead.
It's obviously Obamacare. But you look back at the CBO numbers. In the paper I wrote 3.5 years ago, if we scored Obamacare the way they scored Hillary Care, it'd be $7 trillion, not the one they said. In 1965 with Medicaid, their projections were off by 900%. By Medicare, their projections were off by 1,700%. If they're off by tenfold, that's $70 trillion. In 2009, all the money in the world was $60 trillion. Obamacare is worse than socialized medicine. It's also corporate medicine. It's, as Dr. Berkowitz said, the head of Medicare Medicaid, any nationalized health care plan by definition is redistribution of wealth. It's not from the higher incomes to lower incomes. It's from all of us to a private entity, an insurance company. That's unacceptable. So the idea that the government could come in, pick what insurance companies were winners and losers, and how that occurs is anathema to our country. Tom, in this debate, talked about in January of 12. He says, not if we have Obamacare in North Carolina, it's how we implement it. I'm not that kind of Republican. I'm not waving a white flag. I know exactly what the Constitution says. I know exactly how we can use it. The Commerce Clause is 16 words. It meant to make things regular. What if we, I think it's about 100 insurance companies in the United States. What if all 100 were in our state fighting for your dollar and your business? In this state, if we wanted to open a hospital today in this room, we have to go to the legislators and ask for a certificate of need. Government involved in any free enterprise strangles competition and hurts the most important person, you, me. My lobbyist is right here in this room. We're done listening to these men and women who exempt themselves from these things on top of all of that. Madison said in his 57 paper, that will never occur in America. I think it has because, again, I believe we've advocated our role, that the sovereign is back, we the people.
Where to begin? James Madison also talked about how law and the ideal of it is not to be changing, to make it immutable. And when law becomes mutable, changeable, nobody can keep up with it. Madison identified that, yet we have a president that says, well, let's tweak this law. Let's tweak this a little bit. That is not law. That's political maneuvering that is devastating to our country. Now, we can talk about the numbers that you've heard, and I think these are accurate representations we've heard. But we have to crystallize all of what's wrong with Obamacare as the #1 issue in North Carolina and put it to this issue. And that is, it requires the absolute, unequivocal removal of Kay Hagan from public office. That's what it comes down to. If we don't do that in North Carolina, we give Kay Hagan a thumbs up to say, yeah, you did that, we want more of it. That's why I would say the biggest issue is to make a very clear and unified voice that Kay Hagan must go, must be held accountable for this scourge of a vote that she did that is unconstitutional and without the consent of the governed in the state she is sworn to uphold. Thank you.
When we talk about Obamacare being one of the biggest problems, for me it boils down to something a little simpler. It's our economy and our jobs, and how the Affordable Care Act is not only taking away your insurance, but it's taking away your jobs. It's taking away your money out of your paycheck. And I don't know about the rest of you guys, but in 9th grade, I took an economics class that told me I have to earn money to be able to spend it. Well, businesses need their consumers to be able to spend that money. You as a consumer have to have a job in order to earn money to be able to spend it, and that's how we grow things. So yes, Obamacare is a big issue, but the biggest is our economy and the regulations like the ones coming out of Obamacare that prevent our businesses from being able to grow or even begin to start up. And what we have to look at in the future is jobs coming here. How do we make our state, through that legislation in our Senate, and through not having legislation in our Senate and repealing legislation that's there, desirable for us to have jobs so that our consumers here can have money, so that they can spend money, so that we can grow more jobs and more businesses here in our state.
Okay, we're going to switch from Healthcare, Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, and we're going to talk about Common Core. what is your thoughts on Common Core and how we can stop Common Core? And just throw in there, do you even think we should have a federal Department of Education?
Yes, thank you. Common Core, again, anathema who we are. Americans are for choice. Choice is not the federal government telling you pick one of these three vegetables. The whole premise of who owns your child is at the gate. The state or you? Sure we do. The Department of Education is these social engineers want to help and fix problems. According to John Taylor Gatto's book in Education, 1840, with no NEA, no involvement in any education process at all at the federal level, just local homeschools, churches, local public schools, the American person, average American person, or complex literate, 93 to 100%. 93 to 100%. Common Core, they try to sell it as it's a government role, not a federal government. It's a governor's coming as a state. It is not. It's achieved, funded by the Gates Institution, to put these common ideas of what they need to do to get through it. First grades are taking tests of your college material or not. They would collect data on what kind of car you bought, what's your parents' income. It's a collection of information. Common Core destroys the individual. What they try to do is try to put us in little categories and break us down. No. The American greatness is the individual. This is what central planners forget. When the individual freely decides in economics, in business, in education, in healthcare, society as a whole is superior. True capitalism has lifted all boats in every single field. So Common Core is anti-American. It's surely anti-North Carolinian.
I would say that Common Core is a great example that maybe would lead us to the bigger picture. If someone were to ask me, what is your primary goal as a United States Senator in public education? My answer would simply be this: get the federal government out. I think that's absolutely key. Listen, a lot of folks I talk with today don't even remember the purpose for why the Department of Education was founded. And I'll tell you why. See, the Department of Education was founded simply to be a resource agency. To be a resource where states could maybe take what they had been successful at in education and send it up there, and other states could learn and borrow and say, if I want something that works, I could go to that resource center and I could find out something that worked in another state and maybe come and use it in my state. But you and I know that there's never been a federal agency given birth that didn't grow into a monster. And you and I know that there's never been a federal agency that starts with maybe some kind of purpose that begins to grow and grow and grow and get out of control. And the Department of Education is a perfect example of that, to where that monster now today holds some things such as Common Core over the heads of our states and says, only if you will submit to our plans, only if you will submit to our purposes, will we give you some of your own tax money back. That's called blackmail, where I come from, and that's called wrong, where I come from. And my first goal in public education would simply be to tell the federal government, please step out. My philosophy is the closer that education gets to home, it's always better. Not the federal government, but to the states and the local communities.
Great job.
For me, Common Core is one of the worst things to happen to education. I have looked at the standards. I've been trying to educate myself because I have two small children still in school, and the difference in their education and my oldest education is unbelievable. Math is not math anymore. My 7th grader brings home a math problem, and I go, what is this? And he goes, this is the new math. And I went, no, 2 + 2 still equals 4. And he goes, no, we got to do a little plot. And it may not equal 4 because I got to do all this to get there. That's not what we want to teach our children. Think about it. They tout Common Core as a way to guarantee that our high school diploma will mean something, that our children will be able to have jobs. I say you're wrong, because if they can't do math correctly, they can't even work at the gas station or the local McDonald's. What we have to teach our children, and this begins in the state, not in the federal government, is the important things, how to think for themselves, how to think critically, how to make decisions, how to read things and comprehend them, and how to do math without a calculator. And go back to, please, making them memorize their multiplication tables, because who, for one, thinks it's crazy that you get kids now that need a calculator to multiply things like 5 times 6. That is our federal government at work. And we truly need to get rid of the Department of Education, along with several other departments up there, and go back to a limited federal government and make sure that all that begins in our home state, where we know what kind of jobs and industries are out there for our children, and we can guide their education.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest has been a real voice and a champion on this issue for all of us in North Carolina. How many of you think you've heard Dan Forrest speak on this? He's right, and he'll tell you that the North Carolina General Assembly brought in Common Core, not knowing how much it was going to cost, and without any clear measures of exactly how it was going to be a successful effort. Which I just recently had an interview with, and I've talked on the broadcast several times about this issue. Talked to a PhD, a superintendent, and I said, tell me about Common Core. And after 5 minutes of meandering conversation, I had no clue, and none of our listeners had a clue as to what he was talking about. And that's, I think, a good example of how the left operates in a vacuum and in darkness that somehow gets put into the mainstream. We don't know what this is going to cost. Now, what do we do about this? The idea that we're going to, progress kids by demeaning the idea of multiplication or other known symbols of successful education procedure is a problem. And we have to say no. And you and I as parents and grandparents, we have to say no. Common Core is a disruption of the great American tradition of educating our children. I talked just a little bit earlier tonight to a homeschooler who does something called the classical method of education. This is what we need to get into. Here's how to read. Here's how to write. Yeah, you have your own ability, but I'll tell you this. If Dr. Brannon is seeing my wife, I don't want him as a patient seeing my wife. I don't want him as a parent. I knew you'd catch that too. Just to be clear, doctor. I don't want him to have done well in Common Core and forgotten the necessities of medicine. And that's the great danger that we run in this. Common Core must be diffused. And it's a good example of when general governance tries to become specific. General governance is what the federal government is, even the state government to some example. It's those local levels of school boards, PTAs, and school regions. These are the people that must make these decisions, and we must stand firmly and say no when it colors outside the lenses. And let's get rid of the Department of Public Education and downsize it in Raleigh and get rid of what's happening in Washington, D.C. That is not the way to go. Thank you.
Would you support a constitutional amendment to limit the terms for congressmen and senators and make them live under the laws that they pass?
I do, first of all, let me answer the second part first, and I think I said this earlier. I do believe that our congressmen and our senators must live under the laws they pass. I think that's just common sense, But then again, you can't take common sense for granted in Washington, D.C. anymore, can you? Nope. So we realize that. I do think that this issue of term limits is something that we really need to consider. I do think it's something that is worth consideration. I do have some concerns about it, I'll be honest with you. My concerns are that do we run the risk of turning the government even more over to the bureaucrats? If we find folks that are continuing to run the government, if we are having a more constant turnover of leaders in our U.S. House and in our U.S. Senate. But I also recognize that our founding fathers had no idea, perhaps, when they put all of this into place, that we would find men and women who would shift from being citizen legislators and going and doing the people's business and returning home and picking up with their trade, and instead turn it into a full-time professional politician type of career. That is a great concern. And because we find ourselves at that juncture in our history, indeed it may very well be time that we have to look at term limits and recognize the need to at least consider them for such a time as this.
I'm not even sure congressmen and women have gotten to the point where they don't live under our laws. To me, it was unfathomable that all of a sudden the Affordable Care Act became the big thing where they go, nope, we don't want what the people want, we don't have to live by that. To me, that is completely wrong, and if it means an amendment to the Constitution, I would even support that, because there is no way anybody who is elected to office to represent us should not have to live by the exact same laws and regulations that we live by and be affected by them on an everyday basis. I am all for term limits, and the reason why I say this is because if you get a citizen legislator who goes up, spends their time in office, and comes home, that person who served, if they still want to serve, they can be a mentor. People have forgotten what it was like to actually have mentors. Thankfully for me in the military, I had a wonderful major who was a great mentor to me. She was the only reason I was able to get in and do my job as a branch chief, as a second lieutenant. For those of you who don't know, that is the lowest ranking officer. We amount to about a private. And that meant that I was in charge of about 23 people, and I answered to full bird colonels and at least 1- and 2-star generals on a regular basis. That was my job to brief them. So when I talk about having mentors, we don't need people to spend 20 or 30 years up there to get the job done right. When your time is up and you're ready to go home and you still want to serve, you have the opportunity to serve by continuing to be somebody new's mentor and helping your state get the next person to take your place.
I know what the power of incumbency is. I ran in 2012 in a congressional race against a 20-year plus incumbent. And I recognize the great difficulty before, during, and after that race. My concern is that if we fail, and that's what's happening, you and I, as citizens, are failing to exercise the authority we have given under the Constitution. Because if you look at the most recent turnout of election where I am in November, we had 10.5% of people showing up. The issue, in my view, is not to limit the freedom for us to elect who we will into office. The issue ought to be that we're engaged enough, we're educated enough, we're motivated enough, and we get out there and we do the right thing because we can exercise that. I'm very reluctant to say, well, because we have abused that authority, we're going to take it away with an amendment. That bothers me greatly. However, I will say is one caveat here, as I mentioned. The North Carolina Constitution says the people shall instruct their representatives. And on this issue, it would be especially helpful to hear that instruction from you. But my basic feeling is, if it is a constitutionally allowed item, that's fine, and I think we need to embrace those and not limit those options that we have. Thank you.
We have the best referendum in the country. Every 2 years we have to vote. The responsibility of who's in those positions are you and mine. It's ours. If we do this correctly, the person in the office should not benefit financially. Hamilton said in his 38 paper, if they don't follow the Constitution, they come home, arrest them. See, we have to understand our power. So, my thing is, I don't want to advocate my role. I don't want to take away my responsibility. We must vet these candidates, but the way the system is skewed, it's like 93% incumbents win. But that was passed. The optimism is now is that we're all awake now. We all know the sovereignty, we all know the power. And every issue we've been talking today about, every single one is an unconstitutional act the federal government threw on us. Yeah. See, this is why I'm running to be our ambassador. I'm tired of fighting the tentacles of all these policy wonks. The only way this works is to go to D.C., be a happy warrior, stick a heart and a knife into the heart of the beast and kill it. That's the only way it's going to work. And if we do this correctly in this next election cycle, we're going to motivate so many people to do their serving years, 2, 4, 6 years. But a lot of times, a lot of us are workers, home mommies, entrepreneurs doing stuff. We're just giving our time. But there's a lot on the other side that are progressive politicians that's their career. I don't want to get rid of a Senator Lee or Senator Jesse Helms or Senator Rand Paul. But I hope by doing this correctly, we have 40 more for each of those. And I think that's what's changing. I think we're becoming very active and we're going to take over this, we the people again. But it is frustrating sitting here and answering all these questions and all these issues. There's no education department in the Constitution. There's no health department in the Constitution. It's we've let these progressives. The one thing on education, Dewey taught in 1898, the father of public education. He said the role of public education is to remove the child's father's God and replace it with the government's. And my first question, we talked about education, Common Core, who owns that child? Not the state.
As our next senator from North Carolina, would you support the fair tax proposal, currently HR 25, when it gets to the Senate? Would that support go as far as to become a co-sponsor or make it a campaign issue?
Yes, I would support the fair tax. I believe that the fair tax of the two options that are out there with fair and flat is the one that gets rid of the IRS, takes the government out of your paycheck, and becomes fair across the board. People don't realize how many people don't actually pay taxes because it's based on your income. You think about simple things. I'm a simple person. I looked at the fair tax and I said, aha, people who have illegal activities and make money at that now will pay taxes. Those $7,000 rims they put on their cars, $15,000 stereos they put in those cars, the $2,000 tennis shoes they buy, guess what? We now get their tax money because they certainly weren't paying income tax on the illegal activities. And yes, I would co-sponsor the bill because I think we have got to get away from the tax that we've got now and open up more income, more money in your pocket to be able to spend, because the fair tax not only helps your pocket, it lowers the cost for businesses because it takes away the taxes for the materials for them to make the goods that you're buying, which lowers the cost of those goods. So when the tax is raised a little, you don't see that big a change in the actual price coming out of your pocket. And so it's actually very beneficial for you as an individual and for our businesses.
Ted Cruz was correct when he said, abolish the IRS. That's exactly right. That's where we start. We have to recognize that the IRS is operating under administrative law that is totally antithetical to the United States Constitution. And we must understand, too, that this is the same agency of 16,000 new people that are going to be administering your Obamacare. Are you comfortable with that? I was out with a bullhorn in front of the IRS office in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with a group of patriots, Tea Partiers, Libertarians, Conservatives. We were all there, and we all had the same concern. That this is an agency, a rogue agency that is known to be abusive to people that are exercising their First Amendment rights. So start there. We have got to change the way this is happening in America. When I ran as a congressional candidate, I did stand for the fair tax. The reason is, I like the idea of states being more in charge of this. But I really like to push the envelope with this idea that, yeah, the federal government will get a check from the state for most everything, but we may want to hold back a few dollars until we see that the federal government is behaving under the terms it is obligated to be under the United States Constitution. But I think within the fair tax, we have more of an opportunity to do that. And that's why I would be in favor of the fair tax. As far as supporting it to the point of sponsoring it, I would say yes, I would consider that absolutely. My job as a representative, though, is to prioritize things, and I'd have to make sure that that was the priority of the moment. I hope that answers your question, and thank you for asking.
The fair tax, the best thing about it is it eliminates the 16th Amendment. The 16th Amendment is an attack on what is really important. John Locke's whole philosophy of government is to protect your property. Jefferson said, a good and frugal government does not take the bread out of the mouth of the laborer. That income is your property. They don't need anything else. When you look at the numbers, back to the Constitution, everything for me goes back to the rule book. Article 1, Section 8, the first clause. We have raised in revenues, excise duties, and imposts. Even today, of the 100% of the money the federal government collects, 60% comes from that phrase. The other 40% comes from our income tax. So Ronald Reagan wanted to know in the Grace Report, where does your income tax go to run the government? Our income tax does not go to our government. It goes to pay interest on the debt to a private bank, the Federal Reserve. You cannot go up the economic ladder because we cannot accumulate wealth. Cannot put money into our businesses. So that's why it's crucial to get rid of the Federal Reserve completely. We need to have a constitutional dollar. The Coinage Act of 1792 laid down exactly what our founders said about money. They said a silver piece is exactly 371.25 grains of silver, a gold piece is 245.5 grains of gold, 15 of those equal one of those. Now go do.
Yes.
And what we did was, from 1792 to 1913, our dollar increased in value 17% over those 100 years. When the Federal Reserve came in, the IRS, the income tax, they got a fiat currency, our dollar decreased 98% in value. Without a strong currency, with a central bank gone, a solid constitutional dollar, we cannot fix all these ailments. So it goes back again. The good role of the government is one's property. That's our money, our income. Let the individual decide what to do with that. So we're going to use the fair tax is wonderful because it eliminates the 16. But we don't get to give the federal government any more money. Let's come back, let them run a government that's at 1.5 trillion. Thank you.
Well, one of the things that we've been sharing across the state over these last weeks is in the midst of this campaign is that I am wholeheartedly a believer that we have got to have tax reform in this country. I'm a firm believer that American families are taxed literally to death, and we recognize that. And I believe that sensible tax reform must be on the table, and the fair tax is exactly an example of that. And I want to be very clear that we don't need to be interested in tax reform that is just tax or revenue neutral. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the bigger picture here is the reality that all of us have got to face. And we don't have a revenue problem in the American government. We have a spending problem in the American government. And until we begin to see a federal government that gets a hold of its spending problem, who recognizes that, I don't know about you, but in the church where I pastor, in 2007, when everything was running, the engine was hot, and in this country, we actually had all kinds of resources and revenues. And then 2008 and 2009 hit. And suddenly we had to make serious cuts in our own church budgets. Many of you in businesses had to make cuts in your businesses. Many of you in your homes had to make cuts in your home budgets. I am just continuing to be befuddled by a federal government that somehow can look at you and me, who look at a problem that we're dealing with of maybe lower revenue, and we say, well, you need to cut your budget in your business, you need to cut your budget in your church, you need to cut your budget in your home, but we can just print more money and we can continue to spend at rates and borrow at rates like never before. That's the bigger problem. We need to redo the tax code, but we better make sure that we're not concerned about just being revenue neutral. We need to be interested in cutting spending in our federal government.
This next question says, what do you think about public-private partnerships?
I have a personal story about this. My mother-in-law got a letter in the mail, and it said, you have been on a toll road and you got to pay this fine. My mother-in-law drives about 3 miles a month, and the toll road was about 75 miles down the road. And she got this letter. Now, if you look carefully at the letter, you couldn't see the last 2 digits of the license tag. My guess is the collection agency for this toll road probably sent out this letter to everybody with the same prefix to see who's going to pay up. Now, here is the rub on this. The rub is this. If she doesn't pay that fine that she doesn't owe, then they're going to keep her from getting her license tags renewed. This is part of the problem of a public-private partnership. And it comes down to this. The term is operating under the color of authority. If you like the idea of any non-government agency, any corporation, masquerading with the full power, strength, and credit, if you will, of a government organization, then you ought to love public-private partnership. If that bothers you, then you ought to stand firmly against that. Government is very good at governance. Let corporations be very good at finding ways to generate revenue. But when you combine those, you end up with something very, very close to fascism. And we ought not to support that. Does that mean we can't be innovative when it comes to building roads at I-77? The answer is no, we must be innovative. But we have to do it in a way that is consistent with keeping government and business separate. It's one of those checks and balances that's not really in the Constitution in that sense. We lose a check and balance. We also end up with an idea of corporatism and the idea of crony capitalism that's involved very, very easily with these public-private partnerships. I would stand firmly against them. They ultimately do not lower the cost of construction or road construction or ease transportation. No to public-private partnerships.
Yeah, in 2008, actually, President Obama ran on those as his platform to actually help increase the economy. You get the private corporation getting the public backing, which means it's power, it's money. That's a monopoly, but by definition, as Bill talked about, that was fascism. It's unacceptable, it's anti-American. If you have our interstate system, which is paid by excise tax, gasoline tax, it's already been paid for by those, and now you take the left lane and give it to a private entity, who makes the money? The private entity. That's not even capitalism on that part. So we have to look at the real definition of words and what they are. Whenever the government gets involved in anything outside of its bearing, and you're talking about the Constitution, in 1817, when Madison vetoed the bonus bill, was going to build interstate highways, he said it's not there. Let's get an amendment process. See, they thought through every idea. So since we do with an excise tax, you do not allow that place to be sold to the highest bidder. Because the person that pays for it is you and me. Again, it's a double taxation. We've already paid for that idea. So we have to understand true markets, true innovation, that you're talking about, Bill. We built the best highway system the world's ever seen by excise tax. Let's continue that, and let's not sell it off to the highest bidder. And some of these bidders are foreign corporations. Look at Texas. So again, P3s are not American, and they're definitely not North Carolina.
Let me just say, first of all, I agree that when you look at these partnerships and the whole idea of the toll roads, that's not good government. That's not North Carolina government. We all know how we got in this problem. We all know that the highway fund has been raided by Democrats in our state legislature for some time, who used it for other things, and now suddenly we find ourselves needing money. They've been raising the money with our gas tax, which here in North Carolina we all suffer with time and again, and now they need the money, and they're looking to turn to the toll roads. You and I know that it's a bad premise. You and I recognize that it must be stopped. Because when you really just look at it for what it is, we're saying let's privatize the profits, but let's socialize the risks. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, that is a recipe for disaster. That is not North Carolina values. That's not American values. And I fully support standing against these public-private partnerships as a result of that.
There's not a whole lot to add to that. I agree with the gentleman up here. P3s are very detrimental to us because once you privatize that one part of the road, who's to say that that private company cannot then say who will and will not travel down that part of the road, whether or not you're going to pay the fee. Once they own that road, they own that road, and at any point in time, they can shut it down and say, I don't care if you can pay the toll, I am only letting X, Y, and Z take this road. In that, we cut off our access. But not only that, you have to think about your everyday life. You think about the people that have to pay the tolls on these roads, traveling back and forth to work, because we are now a commuter society having to travel for jobs in order to be able to make the money to pay our bills. You think about the cost just to drive back and forth to work every day for some people, 30 to 45 miles. That is detrimental to our families' economies, which then in turn becomes detrimental to our businesses because our families are our consumers, and when you don't have money to spend, our businesses go under because they cannot sell the product they make. P3s in no way, shape, form, or fashion help us. Even if it does mean a short-term fix to our road money problem, it is not a long-term fix, and it becomes a long-term problem.
What will the qualification you look, what will be the qualifications you look for in order to vote for a future Supreme Court justice?
Simple, original intent. This is very simple. When they wrote the Constitution, they wrote it in plain English. You can read the documents they voted on. Madison said, what's great is about our founders, they tweeted a lot, and we have all those tweets. They had emails everywhere. We were fortunate that, example, for income tax, a guy named Robert Yates wrote under the pseudonym Brutus. He said, if we ever have a direct income tax on your income, and you don't pay it, we'll end up having federal agents come into your house, taking your property and putting you in jail. If they listened, they did this stuff. We have 3 men who wrote notes of the day in Philadelphia, Yates, Martin, and Madison. We have all our convention notes. The best one I read is our Hillsborough Convention. We can see what everything went for. This is a contract, a voluntary compact. The example I always use is what Hamilton used. It's a trustee. I have a will, my wife Jody and I have a will. We hire Riley as my trustee. We go to heaven in a car accident. He has to do every single enumerated function, no more, no less, or he goes to jail. These Supreme Court justices, we have one now, was asked, can the federal government make you eat 3 vegetables a day? And she said yes. Any senator that voted for her should lose their office. See, the original intent of the maker makes a contract alive in the sense of that it doesn't move. We talked about immutable. If we do not have original intent, we don't have a good Supreme Court. And interesting, how many justices are supposed to be on the Supreme Court via the Constitution? There's no number. So we don't have to worry about the 9th, 7th, 8th, whatever. Let's get men and women who will be unbiased umpires to give true original intent of the maker's opinions, and the lawmakers to follow through as well. We must have a Senate that understands that. Original intent, not the idea of the progressives anymore.
This question is a great question, and I'm so glad it comes up. And it should be easy for each of us to answer, I would imagine, because we agree. I would imagine that we want justices that truly believe in original intent and are going to write opinions that reflect that. I'm glad it was brought up, though, for the simple point of making the point to all of us in this room tonight. I've said many times across this state, and there's one reason that I'm in this race. I really believe the election of 2014 is about survival of the United States of America in so many ways. I'm not seeking to be a fearmonger. I'm not seeking to breed fear in the hearts and minds of people. But I can only imagine in my own heart that should this president finish out his last 2 years with a majority of Democrats in the United States Senate, that you could very well see the retirement or resignation of every Supreme Court justice of the liberal stripe of 70 years or older, that this president would be able to appoint that would be rubber stamped by a majority in the United States Senate. Should that happen, we will no longer just bear the wounds of an 8-year presidency of Barack Obama, but there is a generation that we will have had at stake and will have lost in this nation. There is so much at stake in this election, and so much that is critical about the Republicans taking a majority in the United States Senate. That in and of itself, the Supreme Court, should be enough to motivate every North Carolinian to get out and vote. Motivate every North Carolinian to get out and be involved, and every North Carolinian to educate their friends and family at just what is at stake in 2014.
This is a very easy question to answer. I would say that all of us pretty much agree with this one. Before I could vote for any Supreme Court justice, I would have to know that they would not interpret the Constitution they have to know that it was written in the plain language of the bill because it was supposed to be understood by everyone who could read it or have it read to them. And I would go even further to say that I would not want the Supreme Court justices to render decisions in language that I need an attorney to explain to me on the 6 o'clock news. Because the whole premise for them is to uphold what our federal government works for, and that is 18 enumerated powers. They should only see things that are about the federal government, our limited federal government, not have total control over our states. And so I would want a Supreme Court justice who understood that and who could answer actual honest questions about the Constitution and what the amendments were and how they affected the life today. Because if that Supreme Court justice doesn't understand the Constitution, they certainly can't rule based on it.
The tyranny of the judiciary is something we need to be aware of. And the Constitution does stipulate that judges serve on good behavior. You know, that behavior is not good, i.e. consistent with the constitutional mandate. They are required and by oath to honor. It is up to us to say, hey, Justice, we need a movement here, and this person needs to be removed from the bench. Let me give you a quick example. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg recently said, if she were, well, about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, she said if she were going to start a nation today, that she would not use the United States Constitution, that she would use the South African Constitution. And I wanted to see what the difference was, and I looked at the South African Constitution. Every right under the South African Constitution is one that comes from the government. Every promise is from the government. This is the kind of thing that I would call bad behavior that must be challenged and possibly impeached. We need to hold our justices to a high standard of purity when it comes to the Constitution. Now, the other thing I would say in interviewing a congressional Senate appeal to have somebody appear on the judiciary, I would put it this way. I would ask this question: what is the source of your rights as an American citizen? If they said the Constitution, if they said the Congress or the Senate or the executive branch or our founding fathers, I'm sorry, they disqualified themselves. Because under the United States Constitution, in coordination with the Declaration of Independence, your rights come to you via Almighty God. It's one of the reasons in the North Carolina Constitution you can be removed from public office for failure to believe in Almighty God. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's true. You might have some trouble implementing that. But the point is this: if we don't understand that there's an authority above government, and that is God, and that is the American view, regardless of your political persuasion, regardless of your religion, that's not a theocracy that we're talking about. That is the American view of governance. If government is the final authority, then you and I, my friends, live in something that is not a constitutional America. Thank you.
What is your view on foreign policy and intervention? I have lost track. It doesn't matter. I'm just trying to let's get there.
My view of foreign policy is one where we have to stop giving other governments our money. We know who our allies are, and we are not giving our allies the money. We are giving money to countries where we know that they hate us. They burn our flag, they call for the death of our soldiers and our American citizens, and we must stop that. We have to stop that. But then again, in the same vein, we must know who our allies are, and we must stand with them. We are turning our back on Israel now, and that is not something we should do. They have been one of our staunchest allies, and yet we are saying, no, we're not really worried about Iran's nuclear policy. You'll be okay. You're going to be safe. And we're backing off and distancing ourselves from them with this White House. That is wrong. They are our allies, and they deserve our support because they support us. For me, we shouldn't even be giving armaments to other countries that are not our staunchest allies. Not only are we giving away money, but we're giving away things that cost us money. We're giving away things that our military could be using. Are they older? Yes. Do we have newer and later gadgets? Yes, but guess what? They are still things that our military can be using to fight where we have sent them. And for me, I don't think we should go to war with any country that does not first attack us, attack our allies, or attack our soldiers and our bases in other countries. We shouldn't just go to war to go to war, because it is a waste of money and a waste of American lives.
Congress does not have the authority to abdicate their constitutional authority. And one of the things we're reaping the benefits of the 1973 War Powers Act, where Congress said, the president can go ahead and declare these things. And since then, we have seen a huge increase in the United States getting involved in places and times when it really is best not served to do so. We are at the point where we're borrowing money to give away. I like what Rick Perry said about the Middle East and about how we should do budgeting, zero-based budgeting. Every year we come back and start at zero. If this country has been a friend to us, we may continue that relationship. If they've shown hostility, we need to have the power of the purse to make sure that that happens. The idea that we keep on borrowing money to give it away is really a criminal offense when it comes to the abdication of responsibility. Let's not fool ourselves, though. There is a lot of information that you and I are not privy to. Any of our candidates may not get these reports that are confidential, and you must be a member of Congress, you must be a member of Senate to see some of these documents. We have to understand that the United States of America, as a country, a sovereign country, if we feel as though we are threatened, I don't care if the UN agrees with us or not. It's nice to build a consensus, but the United States has the duty, the obligation, and the authority to do whatever it must do to protect this country. Without the consent of anybody else on the planet, I would hope they would stand with us, but that is the job as the world leader that we are. I think we must build consensus, but I think we must be realistic that a lot of what we need to be doing is not engaging militarily as much as looking and finding out what it is that's going on with intelligence on the ground, getting that information and using it wisely. So I hope that answers your question, and thank you for the chance to respond.
One of the things that I mentioned in my opening statement was about that three-legged stool, and one of them is a strong foreign policy. You and I know that we have we have watched over the last 5 years as this president has almost single-handedly destroyed America's reputation and standing on the world stage. As has already been alluded to tonight by some of the folks here on this panel, we recognize that we have our allies no longer knowing that we have their back. Our enemies seem to almost mock us at this particular time. In fact, we fail to recognize the concerns that are staring us in the face. I'm not real sure who came up with the philosophy of this foreign policy of this president called lead from behind, but every one of us in this room would agree this president, bottom line, has just failed to lead, period. And that's what we're facing today. And we've got to recognize that, listen, though our enemies have changed, though the faces have changed, we still cannot shrink from that responsibility of being that shining city on the hill. That's why I do support a strong foreign policy, understanding that at the heart of a strong foreign policy is a strong military. We have watched this president gut our military. We need to provide our men and women in uniform what they need, whether they're on the field in harm's way or whether they're here at home defending us and defending our freedom. Because it's only when you have that strong military that you literally can draw red lines and know what you're talking about. And that's what we have failed to see. Now, I said he's almost single-handedly done this. And I say that because he's had a Democratic-controlled Senate, seated with Kay Hagan, who have sat back and watched this happen to America today. I am strong in believing that we have a responsibility and an opportunity to stand in our day.
It goes back to the Constitution again. Who declares war? Congress. The people close to the House. Bill talked about the 1973 Warsaw Act. Actually, Nixon vetoed it. It was an override. Our founders again debated clearly for about 2 weeks on who would have the power to declare war. They first said to make war. but they said it will never be in the executive's hands. Every executive has the power to make wars, expanded their empire. Madison was clear on that. We'll have an Augustine-type war, a defensive war. Jefferson said, my line stops at defense. So what we want to do is have the biggest, baddest military the world's ever seen. You don't go after the guys crossfitting all day. You're a gent that goes back to being meek, quietly powerful. We protect our friends. I love Washington's Federal Address, paragraph 30 to 37. It's always for American interests to protect our allies. We do that by being prepared. If we would not send our disgraced brave woman did go already to service. Bill, were you in the service already? No. He said, I would not send myself, my boy, my family, and the treasure. We don't do it. That's why we don't have to guess. Does it hurt America? If it does, then all of us will take arms. That's why the Second Amendment is there, because the militia was the backbone of our defense. So we got to get back to, again, it's always, I know I sound rote, but it's the Constitution. We declare war in a defensive manner, then we fight with all we got and come home as fast as we can. We have 900,000 brave military home waiting for their care from the VA. The goal for the VA is to be seen in 6 months. They run like 18 months. That's what we do with our warriors. They can't even get care when they come home. So let's make sure we understand the idea of that document. And we hold everybody accountable to that. The president, Hamilton said, the president does not become commander-in-chief until the Congress declares war. Then he's the chief admiral or chief general. So we have our civilian over our military. So it's important we understand who we are as America. We're the shining city on the hill by not flexing our muscle, but by just standing there, by being meek. That's America.
We have several of the same, basically the same questions. And this is a good one for us to end on before we do our closing comments. Seeing all of you are running as constitutional conservatives and have been part of a grassroots conservative movement to some extent, and you all seem to have a similarly conservative platform, what specifically makes you different from each of the other candidates?
Well, that's a great question, and I really appreciate it. Let me just say that we have determined when we got into this race that we are running a campaign that we pray will be the most focused campaign and the most directed campaign in the history of North Carolina. And that is, we believe that we have a message that we want to share across this state. What I bring to the table today is, as I said, would be the issue of leadership. I really believe that I can bring to the table leadership, and having served as a senior pastor for 24 and a half years. You know, people get the idea of a pastor, you know, it's a lot more than just preaching on Sunday or Wednesday. I have the opportunity to really manage a small business. At First Baptist Church Charlotte, we operate a budget revenue that comes in that has to be managed, and when that revenue doesn't reach what it needs to, then we have to make cuts. I manage a staff there at our church, and I've done that for all these years. I work with people, literally, from all different perspectives, and we recognize that there is a higher calling and a greater purpose, and we're able to unite people together in order to get some things done. You know, a lot of people in this kind of issue say, as a pastor, what really qualifies you to step into the United States Senate? And I said, well, you know, let me just put it in these terms. If you do a pathology report on America tonight, and you tell me about all of the diseases that we find in that pathology report, we can talk about unemployment, we can talk about illegal immigration, we can talk about poverty, we can talk about the breakdown of the family, we can talk about addictions, we can talk about any of those diseases. And I would tell you that I could put names and faces with every one of those diseases, because I've had the privilege of walking through life with people. A lot of folks, a lot of politicians, none of these necessarily, but a lot of politicians will tell you, I'm one of you. Well, I really am. And I've learned as a leader, a servant leader, for over 26 years of walking with people. And I believe I bring that to the United States Senate.
think this is probably the toughest question all of us get asked, is how to differentiate ourselves from each other. And for me, it goes back to the fact that I have already proven my ability to get things done. In my job in the military, I literally was a second lieutenant, supposed to come in and just do some admin work. Found out I had a knack for creating processes. And what I did was create a process that became best business practice for the Department of Defense. The Surgeon General actually came and recognized our process, and we spread it to other Army bases. That to me, I don't like to talk about it. Everybody tells me I have to. That to me was my blessing. My blessing. But then I realized for 2,600 plus soldiers, the people I worked with, that was their blessing. And we served. And for me, it's all about continuing to serve. Being able to go back to that oath I took, because I stood there when I went into office and I pledged the exact same oath our congressmen and women and our senators take to protect and defend our Constitution against enemies, both foreign and domestic. I pledged my life for it. This time I don't have to do that. There'll be no bullets, I hope. But I've already said that I would do that once. And it's my opportunity to serve an underserved population again and stand that oath and protect my Constitution both against enemies, foreign and domestic.
I found it very interesting when I got into this race that some of the pundits said, well, you're going to take away votes from the traditional Republican. You're going to take away votes from the liberty side of things. You're going to take away votes from the T side of things. You're going to take away votes from the evangelical. And the converse of that, the flip side of that is, I believe the messaging in our campaign, some of you are brand new to it, I think is indicative of a message that can be embraced by each of these parts of our Republican Party. Folks, unless we absolutely can come together under one voice, you and I will not win. Our children will lose and our grandchildren will lose. We have to come together in unity. We have to understand that the Republican tent is got to have all of these people and a few others if we're going to be competitive. So I would say, I believe in the candidates. I've put forward the best opportunity for that unity that is absolutely essential. The other thing that I would say is this. One of the reasons our Republican and conservative side of the argument has failed is because we have not been winning the narrative. We have not been doing the messaging we have to do. Now, we can have all the great ideas, we know we do. We can have all the history and the research, we know it works. But unless we have someone who is able and willing to articulate this with a proven track record, as I would bring as a broadcaster, we're going to have difficulty selling this. And that's really what it is. It is a sales job. We have to sell the idea of liberty. We have to sell the idea of the Constitution and help people know that what is at stake is our American birthrights under all of these. It has to be done with passion. It has to be done with a smile and with clarity, and it has to be done with people that really don't necessarily care about any of these things if you're going to be effective. That's precisely what we have to do in the broadcast industry. We have to encourage people to listen to us. We can't do it because we know everything, because we say everything that we think is important. We have to develop a rapport. And I hope I've done that with you tonight, at least started that process. That's exactly what we have to do if we are to win and to be able to maintain a strong United States Senator that will defeat Kay Hagan.
Authenticity, I think that's the key. I've been honored to deliver 9,000 babies. I do a life and death every day. Built a practice that looks like America, looks like North Carolina, 25,000 patients by being authentic, being who I am. I was that baby in the womb of an unmarried 19-year-old. I was the child of a single mom who had 2 kids who ran to the founders' documents. I'm from there. That's who I am. There's no make-believing in Greg. What you see is what you get. And the goal is to beat Senator Hagan with the right constitutional conservative Republican. The last poll shows we're the only one beating her. We're beating her because we're by us not changing who we are. We're the magnet that's bringing social conservatives, fiscal conservatives, conservative Democrats, independents, lovers of liberty and freedom. I got a team. My general consultant is Rand Paul's general consultant. My political director was deputy state director for Ted Cruz. My campaign manager in 5 statewide campaigns for Ron. This is a team that's already been successful in the Tea Party constitutional movement. We're not here to attack anybody here. We're here to build a coalition that will take back our state and take back our country. I believe a revolution is a good phrase. We called it the Revolutionary War. We don't usually talk about this. This ain't bullets and knives and guns. Our founders laid their lives for us. We just have to have the backbone to stand up for those 6 pages and never waver. We want to make sure that the ambassador you hire knows how to articulate the Constitution, the Declaration, the Bill of Rights, knows it inside and out, and can apply them with all the pressure from the establishment, from our side. From our side. Again, Karl Rove stated his function is to defeat the Tea Party. Defeat the Tea Party. We are the conscience of the Republican Party. We are the conscience of our country. The Tea Party is Madison and Jefferson, Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass. That's the Tea Party. I am proud to be called a wacko bird. I am proud. So when we have things today, when they call evil good and good evil, there's a Bible verse, Romans 12:9, says, abhor evil, cling to good. But it's how you do it. The first 2 words are the most important. And genuine love. That's how we change people's hearts on abortion. We change people's hearts on taking our money to give to somebody else when it's better to teach somebody else how to work and go themselves. See, we know that American exceptionalism, as I stated before, is not succeeding. It's the opportunity to keep getting up. An example I've been using, I've had the honor of adopting 3 children from China. The Chinese flag and our American flag. Our 50 stars stand for 50 republics, where the rule of law protects each individual. The 5 stars on the Chinese flag are the caste you're born into. The peasants, the farmers, the manufacturer, and the elites. And you can never go back and forth. And the big star is the state, which is superior to all of them. That's not our republic. We are the individual, again, I always say that, over the collective. And by the way, then the society, the collective, is superior when the individual is free to fail. I'm asking you to be what Orwell called in the day of deceit, when you call the Affordable Care Act as an example. It's not affordable and it's not care. That's a day of ultimate deceit. By telling the truth, you become a revolutionary act. So I'm asking you to go to gregbrand.com. We're looking for your life, your volunteerism, your fortune, your donations, but most importantly, your sacred honor to bond, not on Greg, not the campaign, the mission of a constitutional republic. In 2014, we're going to blow people's minds. Thank you.
Before we do our closing statements, I just want to tell you, if all our questions, I think Brannon did this, but we'll let him have 2 minutes. We were not able for time's sake to get to all the questions, and some of them were very similar, so we tried to pick different topics, try to cover as much as we could. But we're going to keep those questions and talk about putting those on our voter questionnaire our candidate questionnaires that we'll send out. Also encourage you to email these questions to the candidates. Some of the questions are answered on their websites. If you go and look at their websites, some of their questions about their beliefs on abortion and marriage and those things are on their website as well. So if you can go and take a gander at their websites, that'll be great. We'll be getting up now. We'll be starting to hopefully, when I get help, get more stuff up on the website about the elections. And the candidates, the primaries, of course, we'll be focusing on that first, as those come up in May. So at this time, we're going to let each of the candidates give a 2-minute closing remark. Again, we want to thank you for coming, and certainly thank the candidates for being with us tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you now, after they leave, so everybody, it will get noisy, but to have a safe trip home. Remember, we won't meet in December. We'll be back in January. If you need to put your name on the contact sheet so we can email you that information to do so. Cards, literature, and donation box all over here in this area. So at this time this way when we introduce, so we'll go this way as we close. And again, thank you everybody.
Jennifer, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the Gaston Tea Party for the invitation to be here. God bless you for the work that you're doing. Appreciate that very much. I am honored to be here with you tonight, and I have your attention. It is I count it a high honor. I also count it a high honor to be with other people that want to not take away the focus and put it on fighting between us, but to keep that focus on removing Senator Kay Hagan from office. At the end of our discussion, and when we go out of this door after the primary, we have to come to the conclusion that one person is going to be carrying this flag. And I would ask each of you, even if that candidate is not your first choice candidate, that be the person to get behind the movement to replace Kay Hagan. That's what this is about. I understand being a principled person and a principled vote. But there is, I would tell you very quickly, there is no perfect candidate. Never has been, never will be. There may be perfect ideologies, right? But when you put flesh and blood there, you're going to find things that you don't like about every one of us here. You're going to find things you can't agree upon. My goal in this is to be the unifying factor that we have to have, the essential quality in this race for us to win, for us to not just win a little bit, but to send a powerful message for the entire country from the state of North Carolina that we've had enough with socialist-led Democrat policies. And a lot of Democrats have had enough of the same thing. You need to be the candidate that can appeal to that person. And I believe that I am that candidate. I got to focus again on the power and the importance of messaging. We have the message. We need the messenger. Ted Cruz showed us an awful lot on how to do it. You can get the media attention if you're speaking correctly and directly and about the right things. He went over the party, if you will, in a lot of ways and connected with the people. That's precisely what we have to do over and over again to be effective in this office. It's not just about winning this office, it's about governance from that office. It requires you as the voter to instruct that representative, and it requires you also to every day monitor that representative, whether it's me or any one of these candidates here. I thank you so much for your support. I'm going to ask you to go to billflynn.org, billflynn.org, and thank you again so much for letting me be with you tonight.
Thank you so much for having this forum, Jennifer. Thank you for making sure everything got out to all of us so that we could be here tonight to speak with all of you. It is an honor every time I get to come and speak before a group. I'm nervous, awed, and terrified all at the same time, but happy to be here. Extremely happy to be here because it's wonderful to see so many North Carolinians who realize that we're in trouble and want to be part of the change, because we have got to make our own change. Not the hope and change we had when Obama first got elected and what he continued to promise the second time, but true change to take us back to where we came from. And I am a firm believer in that we must have a real everyday person to go up there and be our citizen legislator, and who will spend their time and work towards making change and set a standard operating procedure, for lack of better words, down as a template for the person who comes behind them to step in their shoes and take that forward and continue to put us back on the path to greatness. We must have citizen legislators who are going to be mentors, who are looking to help others, not just for their state, but for our nation. Because remember, in the U.S. Senate, we represent our state, but we also make federal laws, and those represent our state. So we need people who understand that this affects every person, but at the same time is doing what we need to do right for our state, and hoping that we can hang on and move forward and continue to have good citizen legislators come into our Senate and our Congress. Please go to heathergrantnc.com. That's heathergrantnc.com. Thank you.
Well, let me first of all say thank you also to Jennifer and to all of you of the Gaston Tea Party for your time here. I also want to just say thank you to my fellow candidates. I don't know if you've realized that you need to have great respect for every one of these that are up here, Because to put your name on a ballot and to stick your neck out, to be willing to stand up in a day and times like we're living in now, takes a great deal of fortitude. And I want to just say thank you to you guys and lady for the incredible willingness to be willing to even serve and run. You know, tonight we talked about a lot of things, and one of the things that we have talked about could cause you to leave here sort of in doom and gloom when we think about this administration and we think about the leadership. But I'm here to tell you at my core, as you'll learn about me in this campaign going forward, I am an eternal optimist. I really am. I still believe in a day that we're going to have a president that when he speaks, people will respect him and people will believe him. Amen. I still believe in a day that's coming in America where you will have men and women in Congress who will do what is right more than be concerned about their next election. I still believe in a day when you will have men and women in Congress who are willing to stand for God and country more so than their own political party. I still believe that day is coming in America because of what I hear and see in meetings just like this as we gathered and filled this room right here tonight in Gaston County. Oftentimes I'm asked, Mark, really, why are you doing this? And I've thought of the myriad of reasons, and I've shared some of them with you tonight, but I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that one of the reasons goes back to a conversation I had with my dad. You see, my dad's my hero. And I talked to him a long time about this decision I was making. He said, well, Dad, Mark, why is your dad your hero? Because my dad is the epitome of an overcomer. See, my dad was 6 years old when his mom died with cancer. And his dad was a drunk, couldn't take care of him. Dropped him off at an aunt's house in High Point, North Carolina. She couldn't raise a 6-year-old boy. She dropped him off at the children's home, Methodist Children's Home in Winston-Salem on Renolda Road. He was raised there and came out not bitter but better. He immediately went into World War II. He wanted to be a pilot, but they had enough pilots, so they made him a waist gunner on a B-17. My dad had flown 8 missions on that B-17 and had never fired a single shot as that waist gunner. But it was on his 9th mission on November 2nd, 1944, when that plane was shot down over Holland, which was under German occupation. My dad was immediately captured and was held as a prisoner of war for the duration of the war. He was marched over 700 miles in the spring of 1945. He went from a 175-pound soldier to a 125-pound skin and bones when he was liberated. My dad came out of World War II not bitter, but better. He met my mom and married her. They raised 5 children. I'm the baby of 5. 12 grandchildren. My youngest, the 12th one, will graduate, Lord willing, in May from Wake Forest University in the School of Business. And my dad put all of us through college, helped with the grandchildren. My dad never earned more than $32,000 a year at Container Corporation of America. You see, when I look at my dad, and if my mom would have lived to December, they would have been married 65 years. That's where I come from. That's being born and raised in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I want you just to understand my heart tonight that a lot of folks, when I looked at my dad, I said, Dad, what made your generation so great is you guys looked at America from that 30,000-foot view. You really looked at America and realized that everybody had to take risks. Everybody had to make sacrifices. But my generation, we've been poor stewards of that. We've just been more concerned about ourselves than the big picture of our nation. And you see, there's a lot of people that will talk about the America they love. But when I look at my mom and dad, and I look at what they did in raising the 5 of us and those 12 grandchildren, when I look at their generation where hard work, where tears, where sweat really could lead to a greater next generation, that's the America I know and love. Shoot, that's the North Carolina I grew up in. That's the North Carolina I know and love. And if in the providence of God and the voters of North Carolina, you allow me to go to the United States Senate, I commit to you that that will be the senator from North Carolina, the North Carolina voice for North Carolina values. God bless you. Thank you for being here.
I did not know that was not the ending last time. Last time I heard that. But my mission statement is real clear. It's a declaration. My job description is Article 1, Section 3, the job of the senator. Traveling this phenomenal country, in my career from education. Now I live in a microcosm of it in North Carolina. We have the mountains, the Piedmont, the beach. We have agriculture, banking, RTP. We have textiles. Our diversity makes us strong. First in freedom, that's North Carolina. I believe when we get the regulations of the federal government out, we have North Carolina, have an ambassador up there that says, okay, federal government, do your 18 functions. The rest leave to us. We're going to invent the better widgets, the better homes we talked about, the better public schools. We'll have these little laboratories around of freedom and idea and thoughts. I believe, yes, we can, North Carolina. I believe we are the team that actually will build that coalition. We're going to work hard in this campaign to show our differences and show who could produce that idea down the line. When you talked about meeting Senator Hagan, that is crucial. But we must make sure we replace her with a true Paul, Lee, or Cruz. We must understand that if we compromise and vote the lesser of two evils, we're never going to move forward to the dream Mark talked about. Because I'm with him. I'm an overflowing guy. I believe life is better every single day. It's going to be better. You know what's going to come down the pike. That dream of the America that our founders talked about way back when. We've not seen it yet. Those glory days are not there. We had slavery. We had women not having all their rights. We're going forward better in that way that all men are created equal. Now we're fighting for the sanctity of life. We cannot allow that not to be our legacy 10, 20 years from now, that is gone. So I'm pumped because traveling the state the last 8 months, I've been honored. I've delivered 170 babies since we started the campaign. I've missed 6 children. God's providence is beautiful. I don't want to do this. I feel the same way being called to do this. I am 53 years old. My generation is not the World War II generation. Mark talked about his father. The Korean generation, the Vietnam generation. We're going to pass on a less free America unless we stand up now. I want them to look 30 years back, look back and go, that was the time we said no to the overbearing federal government. We said yes to the individual. We said yes to the American exceptionalism again by us actively doing it. This is a fun stretch we're in. Because we could see change every single day. If we had this meeting 8 years ago, how many would have been here? 2 or 3? I don't know. I got into it about 6 years ago. I always thought I knew my history. I always thought I knew what our country was about. But do you really start delving in and looking at that? Because the rhetoric of all these career politicians, and please do not call me that 4-letter word ever. Okay, I'm not a politician. It is servant citizen time. Because we do this thing right. Somebody here's going to run for something else. The commissioner, the county, the mayor, the governor, all over the time. Let's make this Republic of North Carolina the shining city in the hill that the rest of America can see and grow with. This is going to be a fun journey because we know at the end of the day, liberty's going to win. And thank you for joining us on that journey at GrandGrand.com.